partnerships. It wanted partnerships with community groups, and it wanted partnerships with agencies like the province or NGOs that could bring technical expertise to telling us, what do we got here? What's our natural capital here? For example, like the Islands Trust has done some great or sponsored some great sensitive ecosystem inventory mapping. So they've mapped the whole island in terms of what's where, where are the wetlands, where are the dry coastal bluffs, each of them sort of a natural habitat that has sort of unique species and unique pieces to the Bowen puzzle. We've never done anything with that map. It just sits there. You can find it, you can look at it, but have we wrestled with it? Have we asked the question, what does it tell us? Have we asked the question, what have we got? And of what we've got, what's protected? What's not protected? Those are just big questions. And I see some good things have happened on Bowen in the partnership piece, but we need some municipal leadership on that front. Inventory and assessment is one piece. Partnership with community groups and other agencies to get the technical expertise is another piece. There are a bunch of details that I could sort of focus on that really sit as opportunities for Bowen to start to build its own self-awareness and self-knowledge as a way to build toward a vision for going forward.
I want to speak to the community engagement part, because at a recent council meeting, some of our council members dismissed public comments as not being representative of the majority of Bowen's population. There's a couple of questions in there. Has that always been an issue from the multiple perspectives that you have? And you're suggesting we need more public engagement. We need to get off the couch and be more committed. But if that conversation or if that engagement gets shut down, how do you work around that?
Well, my take on that statement is it's a bit of a lazy statement. Unless you've got the facts to back up that statement, I would recommend to politicians, don't say that. If you can specifically point to other sources of data that tell you that you're actually hearing something completely different, good, bring that into the public conversation. But to do that, if it was just said as a single statement and left there hanging, I think whoever said that should be a bit embarrassed. Enough said on that. Public engagement is a tricky business. That's my take. Like when I was mayor, one of the things we did is they were sort of community open houses where people could come and ask any question they wanted. We'd show up, council and a bunch of staff, because staff actually answered most of the questions, almost all the questions usually, because most of the questions, that's what staff are for. They know this stuff. And most of them were sort of, issues oriented. What are we doing? How are we doing it, et cetera. So, that's a forum that can be created. The committee structure is a really important way, though it tends to operate out of the public sphere. And if you're not on the committee, you don't know what it's doing. So it's important, but my recommendation on that is don't have committees that you don't want. Like the worst thing you can do is have committees that are just on the books and grinding away, but you're not paying attention to them. You're not actively asking for their input. That's really counterproductive, because when you waste people's time, they remember it. They know it. Review your committees and make sure they are people. They're working on issues that are mainstream for you and you're working on, and you're actively waiting for their advice. When it comes to sort of just the general council meeting, and you're asking for input on a particular issue, I like to see engagement. I like to see two things. One is council members querying the public. If somebody makes a statement and you want further clarification, ask for it. That lends a sense that you're paying attention and you're curious. The second thing I like to see is that after the public statements have been made, not every time, but some of the time, is that you've learned something as a councillor. You've just listened to some input, reflect on it, bring it into the conversation around the table. That helps people who have made those comments know that you were listening, you're paying attention, and that your input is being sort of digested and is built into sort of the bigger conversation. So I think there are things you can do better. And I think there's a lot of conversation right now about transparency and openness. And I think that, I wouldn't say I was a student of the last council, but I paid attention because I was involved in some issues. I think it could be done better. There's room for improvement, and I'd be interested in hearing from candidates how they're going to do that better.
You were talking about this earlier, and I'm curious if you think we need to update our OCP.
I think we need to take a good look at what we haven't mined out of the existing OCP. And I would point immediately to sort of the whole piece on our natural assets. When I look at sort of what the OCP did in sort of directing us to managing, dealing with sort of our natural environment, I see progress on the climate change piece. I see very little other progress. And, to be fair to the last council, I think they were very directed at trying to deal with, our climate change footprint. But the danger of focusing just on that piece is that what you're doing is you're focusing on building towards sustainability. You're making more stuff, which has its own carbon footprint. Bike path, as good as it is, was like a ton of asphalt, a ton of moving, a ton of stuff that had to be done and money spent to do that. Same thing with the on-island composting, a great idea. And I support it completely, but it's sort of like these are engineered solutions. One of the things I do like about council, I think, has the Environment Committee working right now on what's called natural asset inventory. What we've all learned over particularly this last council is that upgrading infrastructure is really, really expensive. And there's a whole move afoot across Canada and through municipalities across Canada to go, aging infrastructure, big cost. Is there a way that we can invest in nature to do the same thing in a more cost-effective way? And Gibson's, our neighbor, same population as Bowen, right across the water, has really been a leader in this. They sit on a groundwater aquifer that is their water supply. And they quickly figured out that investing in learning about that aquifer and monitoring it carefully is a cost-effective way of dealing with their water supply as against water treatment, any other engineered option. And it's saving them a lot of money, and they got a plan going forward. They've also looked at their creeks from a flood management point of view and recognized that, a little bit of investment in wetland retention and perhaps some settling ponds upstream helps them, is super cost effective from the point of view of flood management downstream, where those streams flow through the community. Bowen needs to do the same. We may find natural asset solutions, but we may not, that are better than engineered solutions. But we need to do that work. It's just smart and cost effective. And by the way, it helps give us a new reason for protecting nature on Bowen and what it's doing for us.
I wonder if you could help us understand the Islands Trust.
Well, here's a little secret. If we were actually called by our proper name would be Bowen Island Municipality. Island would show up twice. Bowen Island, that's us. Island Municipality, that's the legal structure that we are. So we have, unique in British Columbia, a legal structure which essentially is a municipal authority, but embedded within essentially the broad sensibilities and at a certain level, legal authorities of the Islands Trust. We are an island municipality. And I'd like more reference to that because it puts you could almost call it co-management structure together of municipal authority and Islands Trust. And, I'm really proud of what the Islands Trust has done for British Columbia throughout the whole Gulf Islands region. You just have to look at Bowen Island and compare it to West Vancouver. You just have to look at a Gabriola and compare it to Nanaimo next door. You just have to look at a Salt Spring and compare it to the Saanich Peninsula next door. And you get a quick understanding of the vital role that the Islands Trust has played over, 40 years, in sort of keeping those communities small and healthier and avoiding what really the Islands Trust was set up in the first place, which is just rampant suburbanization But that's big picture. You asked me about like, okay, today, what's it doing for us? We have 2 Island Trust trustees elected every election campaign. I'd like those trustees to tell us more about what's going on. I'd like them to keep us better informed. That's just a general statement. Because if we don't know what the Islands Trust is doing for us, then we are going to assume it's not doing much. And if it's not front and center in our daily lives, then we are going to assume it's really not doing much for us. So to me, that's like a first step. But what the Islands Trust, to my mind, has done best is think big and invest in mapping and inventory and assessment that we can benefit from. For example, they did eelgrass mapping all through sort of the Islands Trust area, including the shores of Bowen Island. We didn't have a clue what eelgrass resource we had. We have really benefited from that. And there's a whole story about, the great eelgrass transplant efforts that the municipality, along with partners, have been involved with on Bowen. So that's sort of a piece. They did our sensitive ecosystem inventory mapping back 2007 or something, a long time ago, but still the best, ecosystem mapping done on Bowen Island. They have, a strategic conservation plan for the entire Island Trust area, including Bowen Island sort of is situated in that. We haven't harvested that in our own efforts to figure out what our own conservation vision is for the island. So to me, that's where its real strengths are. And in sort of what we learn, and the Islands trustees are sort of key links here between sort of what other communities are doing that look like us. We need to be comparing ourselves to other small communities and catching their creative sparks and what they're doing well and learning from that. And that's a great pathway that's created by the Islands Trust. What I think we shouldn't count on the Islands Trust to do is be sort of the backstop to bad behavior on Bowen Island. We own the show here. We need to be accountable for governing this place. Our OCP has to be in line with, our OCP amendments have to be in line with, our OCP and broader terms of the Islands Trust. But, my observation of the Islands Trust is that they're very reluctant to meddle in Bowen affairs. Like, we're a prickly community. Like, they're essentially, call it what you want, a senior government. I think the province knows we're a prickly community too. I think Metro Vancouver knows we're a prickly community. Nobody really wants to meddle in Bowen affairs and tell us what to do. So they, I think, are very reticent to go down that route. So to me, the mature relationship with the Islands Trust, and here's the key detail to me, Don. Be proactive. Go, okay, what do we want from the Islands Trust? We're in a partnership. Be a good negotiator. Go after things. Be proactive. Don't wait and say, well, what did we get? Well, what did we ask for? Here's the question for Bowen. What have we asked for? And that, to me, is the central question. And if we're not asking for things, don't be surprised if we're not getting things. So I'd like, going forward, I want basically a proactive posture with regards to the Islands Trust, and a mutual respect that says, hey, we've got a blessing here. Let's exercise our blessing. This is a good relationship.
So you talked about prickly. Let's talk about Cape Roger Curtis.
Oh, prickly. I believe me, I wear scars from that conversation that went on from, when I was mayor in 2005, right through until, I finished my term. We made a decision on it. We decided not to go with rezoning. It's a fascinating area because it holds such beauty, such natural assets. It holds such a place in the heart of Bowen Islanders. It is, and it does to this day. It's just such a central part of how we define Bowen Island. So it matters to us. And it's had such a wild history, of this giant development proposed that we just as a community couldn't swallow, to then essentially retreating into a period of time where it went forward as a subdivision, but there was this acrimony over the very large docks that were built there that really, you look at them and you go, what are we trying to do here? They continue to puzzle me in terms of what the landowners are doing, because they're just so invasive, and yet they are so little used. They just seem to be spec docks, speculation docks that enhance the value of the property, but really aren't being used.